There's a specific kind of silence that comes right before everything breaks. Not peace, not calm, something tighter than that. A held breath the whole world takes at once, like the sky itself knows what is about to happen and is deciding whether to warn you or just let it come. Maya Chin had heard that silence before. Once, when she was 9 years old, and her mother didn't come home, and nobody told her why for 3 days. She remembered sitting at the kitchen table watching the door, and the house went so quiet she could hear the refrigerator humming like it was trying to fill the space. She remembered thinking, even at 9, that silence like that was never actually empty. It was always full of something, something waiting. She was 26 the second time she heard it. She was standing waist deep in brown water that smelled like rust and old earth, holding a woman she had never met before in her life. A woman who was maybe 70 years old and shaking so hard her teeth were knocking together. And the water was still rising, still moving, still pulling at everything that wasn't bolted down. Lawn chairs and plastic bins and a child's shoe and things she didn't let herself look at too closely. And the sky above them had gone the color of a bruise. Purple, green, and wrong. And somewhere behind her, the sound of the current was getting louder. And the woman was crying, really crying. Not the polite kind, but the animal kind, the kind that comes from somewhere below thought. And she was saying, "The flood is coming. Help me. Please help me." And Maya held her tighter. And the water surged. This is a story about what happens in the space between reaching out and being caught. It is about a woman who had spent 8 years learning how to stay calm when the world came apart at the seams. It is about an old woman who had lived in the same house for 41 years and watched the water swallow it in 41 minutes. It is about a boy from a town so small it didn't have a stoplight, who put on a green uniform at 17 because he didn't know what else to do with the size of what he felt and discovered that the uniform had a name for it: service. It is about the way strangers grab each other in disasters and hold on. Not because they know each other, not because they chose each other, but because the water is rising and there's no one else. It is about what that does to a person. What it leaves behind. This story happened. The names have been changed. The water was real. The fear was real. The holding on, every bit of it, was real. Start here. The morning the flood came, Maya Chun made eggs. Scrambled, the way she always made them when she wasn't paying attention. Too fast over too much heat, so they came out a little rubbery, a little dry, and she ate them standing at the counter because sitting down at the table by herself in the apartment still felt like an admission of something she wasn't ready to admit. She had a cup of coffee that had gone mostly cold. She had a weather app notification she swiped away without reading because the weather app had been crying wolf all week, and she had a shift briefing at 7, and she did not have the bandwidth for dramatized rainfall predictions before she'd finished her first cup. She was a wilderness first responder with the county search and rescue auxiliary. She had been doing it for 8 years, since she was 18, and had signed up on a dare from a girl she no longer spoke to, and then discovered, to her own considerable surprise, that she was very good at it. Not in a flashy way. Not in the way that makes for good television. In a quiet way. In a way that meant when everything around her was falling apart, something in her chest went still and flat and functional like a gyroscope finding level. Her supervisor called it composure. Her ex-boyfriend had called it coldness. She had never been sure which of them was right. She rinsed her plate, pulled her hair back, checked her radio, and walked out into a morning that smelled like wet concrete and something deeper underneath it. Something mineral, something old. The kind of smell that comes up from ground that has taken in more water than it knows what to do with. She noticed it, filed it, walked to her truck. She had a 40-minute drive to the staging area. The first 20 minutes were fine. Then, the radio crackled. The town of Harlow Creek sat in a river valley the way a coin sits in the bottom of a bowl, low, contained, surrounded on 3 sides by hills that were beautiful in October and treacherous in spring. The Arlen River ran through its eastern edge, slow and gray most of the year, the kind of river people forget is a river and start thinking of as scenery. Children grew up throwing rocks into it. Old men fished its banks with the patient certainty of people who have nowhere better to be. The diner on River Road had a mural of it painted on the east wall, done by someone's aunt in 1987 in colors that were now sun-faded and sweet. Nobody in Harlow Creek was afraid of the Arlen River. That was, it would later be said, the problem. The rains had started 4 days earlier, Not dramatically. Not the kind of rain that makes people look at each other across dinner tables with raised eyebrows. The quiet kind. The persistent kind. The kind that just keeps going past the point where you expect it to stop, so that you look up on the third day and realize you haven't seen the sun since Tuesday, and everything outside is a particular shade of gray-green that means the ground is saturated, the drainage is running, the creeks that feed into the Arlen from the hills are running faster and higher than they should be, and somewhere upstream, in the hills where nobody lives, something is building. The National Weather Service issued a flash flood watch at 6:42 in the morning. By 7:15, it was a warning. By 7:40, the Arlen River had crested its eastern bank for the first time in 32 years. Maya got the call at 7:22. She turned her truck around on a county road, gravel spinning under her tires, and drove toward the water. The staging area was a high school parking lot on the west side of town, elevated, solid, far enough from the river that the incident commander, a man named Darren Walsh, who had been doing this since before Maya was born, had set up a folding table with laminated maps and a coffee maker that nobody had time to use. There were already 8 people when Maya got there. There were 12 by the time she'd signed in. 21 by 8 o'clock. Some of them she knew. Rico, her regular partner, who was a big man with a calm face and a laugh that he kept holstered during operations. Judith, who was 63 and had the lung capacity of a competitive swimmer and could move through water faster than people half her age. The 2 young guys from the volunteer fire department, whose names Maya always mixed up. She thought of them privately as Tall One and Other Tall One. A scout team from the Regional Emergency Response Corps had been integrated into their unit overnight. 4 of them, green-badged, younger than she usually worked with. She noted their faces without attaching stories to them yet. There would be time for that later, if there was a later to have time in. Darren briefed them in the flat. Rapid way, he briefed everything, pointing at the laminated map with a marker that had run dry and was leaving ghost lines. The Arlen had taken the eastern bank. The low-lying residential area along River Road, 37 homes, estimated 90-plus residents, many of them elderly because it was the kind of neighborhood that used to be affordable and had aged in place, was already in the flood path. Emergency evacuation orders had gone out at 7:05. Some people had left. Some people had not. The ones who had not were the job. Maya's team, herself, Rico, and one of the scouts, a 20-year-old named Daniel Park, who had a face that looked like it hadn't decided what age it was going to settle into yet, was assigned the lower end of River Road, the 4-block stretch closest to the water. Highest risk, worst access, the streets down they were already under. They would be going in on foot through whatever was there. She checked her gear. Dry suit, the whole bag, harness, radio, first aid kit at her hip. She had done this before. Not exactly this, but something shaped like this. She moved toward the water. River Road didn't look like a road anymore. It looked like a river that had been trying to remember being a road and had given up somewhere around the stop sign, which was still standing but had water at its waist and a plastic laundry basket hooked on it like an ornament. The houses were still there, mostly brick and aluminum sided and old wood frame. Their front yards gone, their porch steps gone, water sitting at their windows in some places and at their roof lines in others. Cars and driveways had become boats and driveways, floating low and useless. The water was brown, not the romantic brown of rivers and paintings. The brown of everything that had been picked up from somewhere else. Topsoil, motor oil, whatever lives in the sediment of a river that's been running for centuries. It moved with a slow, muscular confidence that was worse than fast water. Fast water is honest. Slow-moving floodwater looks almost patient, like it's in no hurry, like it has already decided what it's going to take, and is just going around to collect. Maya waded into her thighs. The cold hit her through the dry suit in that particular way, not immediate, but creeping, working its way in through the margins. Rico was to her left, Daniel behind, and right. She could hear her own breathing. They worked house to house. Some were empty, doors swinging open where people had gone out in a hurry, chairs on their sides inside like the house had shrugged. Some had people still in them. A man in his 80s who had refused to leave because he had a dog, and someone had told him there was no room for dogs in the emergency shelter, which had made him furious enough to stay, and which made Maya furious on his behalf as she helped him out the window with the dog tucked under one arm like a loaf of bread. A young mother with 2 kids who had waited too long and was now standing on her kitchen counter, the water at the cabinet handles. The children very quiet in the way children go quiet when they understand something is wrong, but haven't been given the vocabulary for it yet. They moved, house to house. The radio traffic was constant. Other teams calling in, coordinates, casualty counts, water levels, the mechanical language of disaster operations that strips everything down in numbers and compass directions because that is what can be transmitted and acted on. Daniel, Maya noticed, was good. Not showy good, functional good. He moved through the water with the patient steadiness of someone who had been taught how to do this and had paid attention during the teaching. He didn't talk much. When he needed to say something, he said it cleanly and stopped. She filed this away. They were 3 blocks in when the radio told them about the woman on Sycamore Court. Sycamore Court was a cul-de-sac off the lower end of River Road. 6 houses, dead end, and according to the resident list the county had cross-referenced with their 911 records. One confirmed resident who had not been evacuated and who had called in at 7:58, voice high and breathless and very clear on the phone. The flood is coming. Help me. Please help me. The dispatcher had logged her name as Eleanor Marsh, age 71. Her address was 4 Sycamore Court. She had lived there for 41 years. The water in Sycamore Court was at Maya's waist by the time they turned onto it. She could feel the current now, not violent, but present, the kind of sideways pull that turns an ankle if you're not paying attention. That takes a child off their feet in seconds. The houses here were slightly lower than River Road, a geographic accident that had been unimportant for 41 years and was now catastrophically important. She saw Eleanor Marsh through the front window of number 4. Eleanor was standing on what had been her porch and was now a floating wooden platform, gripping the porch railing with both hands, the water at her hips. She was wearing a housecoat, yellow, with small white flowers on it, and she had no shoes on. Her hair, white and fine, was plastered her head. She was shaking, not from cold alone. Maya moved toward her. Daniel was already moving. Eleanor saw them, and her face did something complicated. Relief and shame and the particular grief of a person who had lived independently for a very long time and was now standing on her own porch in a housecoat waiting to be rescued by strangers. And all of that was visible at once in the way her mouth moved before any sound came out. I try to leave, Eleanor said, when Maya reached the porch steps that were underwater, that Maya fell for with her feet rather than saw. I tried to leave. I couldn't get the door open against the water. I don't know when she stopped. Her voice cracked in a specific way. The way voices crack when they've been holding something for a long time. I called. I didn't know if anyone, we're here, Maya said. Simple. Flat. Not warm. Exactly. There wasn't time for warm, but solid. The way you want a wall to sound if a wall could talk. We've got you. What's your name? Eleanor. Eleanor. I'm Maya. This is Daniel. We're going to get you off this porch and to higher ground. Are you hurt anywhere? No, I don't think so. My hip. She hesitated. Old problem. It's fine. Maya filed the hip. Asked about medications, allergies, the standard assessment running through her like a program in the background. Eleanor answered clearly, precisely, which told Maya something. Shock hadn't scrambled her yet. She was scared but present. That was workable. Daniel had already positioned himself on Eleanor's left, his hand on the railing, ready. Maya took Eleanor's right side. They began to move. The porch was 2 steps down to what had been the front yard. The front yard was now 3 feet of moving water. When Eleanor's feet found the first submerged step and the cold water hit her to the waist, she made a sound, short, bitten off, and gripped Maya's arm with a strength that would leave a bruise. I've got you, Maya said. Don't let go, Eleanor said. I won't. They moved into the yard. The current here was stronger than it had been on River Road. The cul-de-sac was acting as a collection point, water pouring into it faster than it could drain. Maya could feel it against her legs, insistent, directional. She planted each step deliberately. Daniel matched her pace on the other side of Eleanor. Between them, Eleanor walked, shuffled really, her feet finding the ground by faith more than sight, and held on. They were 8 feet from the porch when Maya felt the surge. Not a wave, not dramatic. A rise, sudden, a foot of water that wasn't there, and then was as if the river had exhaled, and the current went from insistent to something harder. Eleanor stumbled. Maya caught her. Eleanor's grip on her arm went vice-tight, and her face went white, and she said, "The flood is coming. Help me, please." And Maya pulled her in close, chest to chest, both arms around her. Eleanor's wet hair against her face, the smell of floodwater and fear and the particular soap of someone's grandmother. She planted her feet, and she held on. Daniel was on Eleanor's other side, his arm across both of them, his body angled into the current the way he'd been taught. The surge moved through them. It pushed. It pulled. It took a garden gnome from somewhere and sent it past them like a small ceramic fatality. And then it passed. The water settled back. Still high. Still moving. But the worst of it had spent itself. Eleanor was crying. Full and unguarded, the animal kind, the kind that doesn't ask permission. Her whole body was shaking against Maya's, and she kept saying please and thank you in the same breath, over and over as if they were the same word. Maya held her tighter. She had been trained for water rescues, for trauma response, for the clinical architecture of emergencies. She had not been trained for what it felt like to have someone's gratitude pour into you in the middle of a flood, to have a woman you met 4 minutes ago hold you like you were the only solid thing left. She did not think about this. There would be time to think about it later. She moved. It took 11 more minutes to get Eleanor Marsh to the high ground at the end of River Road, where the evacuation shuttle was waiting. 11 minutes of cold water and slow steps and Eleanor saying things to Daniel, asking him his name, asking where he was from, the social reflex of a woman who had probably never met a stranger in 71 years and was not about to start now, even hypothermia deep in floodwater. He answered her, every question, in that clean, stop way he had, when they got her to the shuttle, when the EMTs took her shoulders and sat her down and wrapped her in one of those silver emergency blankets that crinkle like you're being hugged by a potato chip bag. Eleanor grabbed Maya's hand before she could pull away. You didn't let go, Eleanor said. Maya looked at her, at the yellow housecoat with the white flowers soaked and heavy, at her white hair, at her face, which was the face of someone who had survived something and knew it. No, Maya said. I didn't. She didn't say anything else. She turned back toward the water. There were more houses. There were more people. She waded back in. The thing about flood rescue that nobody who hasn't done it understands is that it is not dramatic in the way that movies make disaster look dramatic. It is not running. It is not explosions. It is slow, exhausting, cold, repetitive work. The same movements over and over, house after house. The same assessments, the same questions, the same helping someone through a window or off a porch or down a submerged staircase. What breaks you isn't the danger. It's the accumulation. By 11 in the morning, Maya's team had cleared 14 houses. They had moved 9 residents to safety, found 2 who needed immediate medical attention, and flagged 3 properties for structural instability. The water level in the lowest part of Sycamore Court had risen another 18 inches since they'd pulled Eleanor out. Darren Walsh had called in 2 additional boats from a neighboring county. The National Guard was being activated somewhere in the distance of bureaucracy. Maya knew this the way she knew everything on a long operation. In fragments, through the radio, slotted into a bigger picture she could only partially see. She stopped at noon to drink water and eat a granola bar that tasted like nothing because her taste buds had given up, and Daniel stopped next to her, and they stood there on the high end of River Road with the brown water in front of them, and the sound of it everywhere, constant, that deep-moving sound that floods make that is less like rain and more like breathing. You okay? She asked him. It was a real question. She had watched him. He had been steady all morning, but steadiness costs something, and she'd been doing this long enough to know the bill comes due. He thought about it, which she respected. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I am okay. He looked at the water. Is it always like this? She considered lying. The kind lie. The useful lie that keeps people operational. She decided against it. No, she said. Sometimes it's worse. He nodded, like that was the answer he wanted. Like worse was something he could work with. The radio crackled. Darren's voice. A report of a possible victim in a vehicle east side, near the old railroad bridge. Partial submersion. Maya stuffed the rest of the granola bar in her pocket. Daniel was already moving. She followed. The water was still rising. And Maya, Chun waded back into it, the way she always did, the way she would keep doing, the way that had never once felt like bravery to her. It just felt like the thing you did when someone needed you to do it, when the water was coming and there was nowhere else to be. She moved. The flood kept breathing. Somewhere behind her, on a high school parking lot on the west side of town, Eleanor Marsh sat in a silver emergency blanket and held a cup of coffee with both hands and watched the hills and did not look at the water. She had her cup. She had her hands. She had been held when the surge came. For now, that was enough. For now, that was everything. The vehicle at the railroad bridge was a 1997 Ford pickup, dark green, listed to its passenger side in 4 feet of moving water, with the driver's side window half down, and a man inside who was either unconscious or had decided this was a good place for a nap, which, given the circumstances, seemed unlikely. Maya saw the truck from 30 yards out, and her brain did the fast, silent math that 8 years of training builds into you like load-bearing architecture. Vehicle in moving water. Driver unresponsive. Partial submersion, driver's side elevated, passenger door below the waterline, which meant it wouldn't open easily. Window half down, which meant water was getting in, which meant the clock had a face, and it was not smiling. I'll take the approach, she said to Daniel. You run anchor. If I signal 3 pulls, haul me back. Copy, he said. She moved toward the truck. The water near the old railroad bridge was different from the residential water on River Road. It had a personality channeled by the concrete bridge pilings into something deliberate and fast, moving in a direction it had decided on and was committed to. She felt it against her legs like a shove from someone much larger than her who didn't care if she stayed standing. She leaned into it, planted each step. The throw bag was in her left hand. Her right hand was free. She reached the truck. Up close, the man inside was old. Late 70s, maybe. He had a feed store cap on, the kind with the pre-bent brim, and his head was tilted against the headrest at an angle that meant either he was deeply asleep or deeply not. She couldn't see his chest moving from outside. She could see water on the passenger seat, rising. She banged on the roof. Sir, can you hear me? Nothing. She banged again. Harder. The man's head moved. Slow, like a compass needle finding north. His eyes opened. He looked at Maya through the half-open window with the particular expression of someone who has woken up in water and taken a moment to find a way to feel about that. Well, he said. His voice was roughed up at the edges like old wood. I suppose I fell asleep. Sir, I need you to stay still. I'm going to get you out of the vehicle. Are you in pain anywhere? He considered this with what seemed to be genuine thoughtfulness. My knee. The bad one. It's always the bad one. He looked at the water on his passenger seat. That's a problem, isn't it? It's manageable. What's your name? Harold. Harold. I'm Maya. I'm with Search and Rescue. I'm going to help you out through the window. Can you move your arms and upper body? I imagine so. He shifted, experimental. Winced. Yes. Okay, here's what we're going to do. She talked him through it the way she talked everyone through it. Simple, sequential, one step at a time, because when people are scared, they can only process one thing, and if you give them 2 things at once, they freeze. She got her hands through the window. She got Harold's hands on her arms. She talked. He moved. He was heavier than he looked, and the water was working against her. And at some point, she heard the truck groan, a low, structural sound that she recognized and did not appreciate. And she moved faster. He came through the window sideways, the way a letter comes out of an envelope, and she caught him both arms, and they were in the water together, and she had him, and the truck groaned again, and she moved. Daniel was there. He had not waited for 3 pulls. He had seen what was happening and moved anyway, and he took Harold's other side, and they moved him through the current, Harold's bad knee dragging, Harold himself remarkably uncomplaining about all of this in the way of men of a certain generation who have decided long ago that complaining was a category of effort they were not willing to spend. They got him to high ground. They sat him down. The EMTs came. The truck behind them listed further and slid and went slowly sideways into the current, and they watched it go. Harold watched it go too from the shoulder of the road. Well, he said again. Maya looked at him. That was my daddy's truck, Harold said. His voice was still rough, but something had moved in it, something that wasn't the cold. Had it 30 years. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. Maya didn't say anything either. She sat next to him on the guardrail for 30 seconds, which was all she had, and then she stood up and went back to work. By 2 in the afternoon, the rain had started again. This was the kind of information that lands in the stomach like a drop stone because the rain had briefly stopped around 10, and there had been in the staging area a collective shift in posture, shoulders lowering, jaws unclenching, The involuntary optimism that fine motor muscles perform when the immediate pressure drops. Then the rain came back and the shoulders came back up and everyone adjusted and kept going. Maya adjusted and kept going. She had pulled 9 people from flooded structures before noon. By 2 o'clock, the number was 14. She had lost track of whether she was cold. Her feet had gone past the point of feeling cold and settled into something that was less a temperature and more an absence of temperature, a blank where sensation had been. She knew this was manageable. She knew what to watch for. She was watching for it when the call came in about the school. Harlow Creek Elementary was on the east end of town, a low, flat-roofed building from the 1970s that sat 4 feet below street grade, a design choice that had seemed fine in 1974 and was now catastrophically unhelpful. It had been evacuated at 7 in the morning, all the children and staff out before the water came. But the custodian had gone back at 9 to get something. His account of what he'd gone back for changed every time he told it, as accounts of bad decisions often do, and had found the water coming in through the east doors and had gone for higher ground inside the building because the parking lot was already too deep to cross. He had been in the building for 5 hours. His name was Marcus Webb. He was 44. He had texted his wife at 9:30 to tell her he was fine, and at 11:30 to tell her he was on a roof access landing, and at 1:15, which was when she called 911, he had stopped answering. Darren Walsh assigned Maya and Daniel to the school. The roof landing is accessible from the exterior staircase on the west end, Darren said, pointing at the building schematic, which was a photocopy of a photocopy and slightly blurred. Water's at 4 feet on the west side, probably higher on the east. You'll need a boat for approach. The boat was a flat-bottomed aluminum rescue craft that seated 4 and moved through shallow floodwater with the grace of a reluctant shopping cart. Maya had driven it before. She drove it now across what had been the school parking lot and was now a shallow inland sea, weaving between submerged cars and a set of goalposts from the athletic field that were sticking up out of the water like a crown. Daniel sat in the bow and watched ahead and said right and left when she needed him to. The west side of the building came into view. The exterior staircase was there, metal, bolted to the brick, rising in a Z shape to the roof access landing. And on the landing, sitting on the top step with his knees pulled up and his phone in his hands and an expression on his face that mixed profound embarrassment with profound relief, was Marcus Webb. He was alive. He was cold and stiff and had been sitting in one position for 3 hours, and his phone had died at 1:45, which was why he'd stopped answering. And when Maya climbed the staircase to him and said, "Mr. Webb," he stood up too fast and swayed and grabbed the railing and said with feeling, "I am so embarrassed." "Don't be," Maya said. "I went back for Maya. It doesn't matter what I went back for. It really doesn't." She got him into the boat. He was a large man, and the aluminum craft made a sound of mild protest at receiving him, but it held. Daniel handed him a Mylar blanket with the efficiency of someone who had been handing out Mylar blankets all day and had found his rhythm with it. Marcus wrapped it around himself and sat very still. "My wife," he started. "She's the one who called it in," Maya said. "She knows where you are." He put his face in his hands. Not crying. Something adjacent. The thing men of a certain age do when relief gets too big for the space allowed. Maya turned the boat around and moved back across the parking lot sea. It was Rico who found the second woman. He radioed it in at 3:20, his voice carrying that specific flatness he put on when things were bad. Not panic, not urgency, just the deliberate calm of a man turning his own volume down so that the information could travel clearly. About a female, approximately 60, 65, non-ambulatory, second floor window. 22, River Road. She can communicate, but she's not moving under her own power. Possible fall. Requesting backup. 22, River Road was 3 blocks from where Maya was. She was there in 7 minutes. The woman in the second floor window was named Patricia Okafor. She had fallen on her way up the stairs as the water came in, slipped on my own rug, she said, with the tartness of someone who had spent 62 years being competent and was furious with herself for this specific failure, and had managed to drag herself up the remaining stairs to the second floor, but could not put weight on her left ankle. The ankle was bad. Not broken, probably, but bad enough that she had spent 6 hours on her bathroom floor listening to the water move through her house below her and unable to get to a phone that was on a nightstand 8 feet away. She had gotten to the phone by crawling. This had taken an hour. I'm not going to complain about any of this, she told Maya. When Maya had climbed through the second floor window on a ladder Rico had found in a neighbor's garage and was now assessing the ankle. I just want to know for the record that I am not someone who falls on her own rug. Noted, Maya said, I've been doing yoga for 15 years. 15 years. The rug was probably wet. The rug was absolutely wet. Patricia looked at her ankle, which Maya had wrapped in an improvised splint from materials that included a section of curtain rod and a scarf. Is that going to hold? Long enough to get you out of here. That's not a no. It's not a no, Maya agreed. Patricia Okafor laughed. A real one, the kind that surprised her. It came out of her chest like something that had been waiting for a crack to escape through, and she laughed for about 4 seconds and then composed herself and said, all right, let's go. Getting her out the window on the ladder was a project that required Rico on the outside and Maya on the inside and Daniel below steadying the ladder and 3 minutes of coordinated effort, and Patricia saying, I am 62 years old, and this is absolutely not my finest hour at regular intervals throughout. When she was down and in the boat, and her ankle was elevated on a flotation cushion that Rico had produced from somewhere, she looked at the three of them, Maya, Rico, Daniel, and said, I want all of you to know that I made dinner for the whole street every Thanksgiving for 30 years, and if any of you come back and knock on that door next November, I will feed you until you cannot move. I'm holding you to that, Rico said. He was smiling. The first time Maya had seen him smile all day. She noted it the way she noted everything, filed it, held it somewhere small and warm. They moved Patricia to the evacuation point. The staging area at 4 in the afternoon looked like a place that had been running a war and was entering its 9th hour of it. The folding tables were covered in maps and coffee cups and radios and protein bar wrappers. The parking lot had become a temporary triage zone. Not because there were many serious injuries. Thank God, there are not many serious injuries, but because there are many people who needed dry clothes and hot drinks and the particular human attention that disaster operations call welfare checks, and that is really just someone sitting with you for a few minutes so you don't feel like you almost died alone. Maya sat down for the first time since 6 in the morning. She sat on the rear bumper of an ambulance and took her boots off, and her feet were white and wrinkled and very cold, and she looked at them for a moment with the detached interest of looking at a machine that had performed beyond specification. She had logged 16 rescued individuals by the last count. The number across all teams was 63. 63 people who had been in the water's path. 63 people in dry blankets now. The number would settle differently in her later. Right now, it was just a number. It would mean something different at 3 in the morning a week from now, when she woke up with the sound of moving water in her ears and could not locate for a few seconds what was real. She knew that was coming. She had done this before. Daniel sat next to her on the bumper. His boots were off too. His socks, which were orange, a fact she had somehow not noticed until now, were soaked through. 16, he said. He had the tally sheet. Yeah. My record before today was 3. He paused. In one day, I mean, from a training exercise. This wasn't a training exercise. No, he said. He looked at his orange socks. No, it really was not. She wanted to say something that would be useful to him, something that could contain what the day had been, and make it portable, make it a thing he could carry without it carrying him. She had had supervisors who had done that for her in those early years. Said the right thing. She had been grateful. She couldn't find the words. She was too tired, and the words she knew felt too small. So she just sat there, and Daniel sat there, and the rain fell. And somewhere across town, Eleanor Marsh was in a community center gymnasium in dry clothes donated by somebody, drinking her second cup of coffee, which was better than the first because she'd been able to put real sugar in it. And she was talking to a woman next to her about her garden, about what might have survived and what had certainly not, because Eleanor Marsh had lived in Harlow Creek for 41 years, and she knew that when the water went down, the conversation had to start, turning toward what comes next, or it just turns in circles, and she was not the kind of woman who turned in circles. She was the kind of woman who had a plan. She was thinking about her tulip bulbs. She was thinking somewhere underneath that about a woman in a dry suit who had held her in a surge and said, I've got you, with the absolute conviction of someone who would not let the flood have her. And she was holding on to that the way she'd held onto the railing. The way you hold on to anything when the water is moving and you need something that doesn't move. The rain kept falling. The rescue teams kept going. In a parking lot on the west side of town, a 20-year-old named Daniel Park in wet orange socks sat next to a woman who had spent 8 years learning how to walk into water and come back out. And he was learning, sitting there, that the walking back out was not the hard part. The hard part was what you carried. The water was still rising in the low places, but it was somewhere in the long hours of that afternoon beginning to crest. Not stop, not recede, just crest. The point where the pressure stops building. The point where the worst of it has been. They didn't know that yet. They were still in the middle of it. But the water knew. The water always knows. It was as high as it was going to get. Now came the long work of what came after. The water peaked at 4:47 in the afternoon. Nobody in Harlow Creek knew at the time. The knowing came later from gauges and records, from the kind of precise retrospective accounting that humans do after catastrophe to make the terrifying feel measurable. In the moment on the ground, in the water, there was no announcement, no bell. The Arlen River simply reached the outer edge of what it could do with the volume it had and stopped adding to itself, and the world did not change in any perceptible way because of this. The water was still there. It was still cold. It was still moving, but it was no longer rising. Maya Chin did not know this. She was in a house on the north end of River Road on the second floor, going room to room in the particular systematic way that training builds into you so deep it runs itself. Check the closets, check under the beds, call out before you open any door, because a frightened person in the dark is unpredictable. The house had already been cleared by another team earlier in the day, but a call had come in. A neighbor, safe in the shelter, who thought she'd seen a light in the second floor window around 3 o'clock. Could have been reflection off the water. Could have been nothing. Could have been something. So Maya was in the house, moving room to room, calling out. The house smelled like floodwater and the particular intimacy of someone else's belongings, the furniture polish they used, and the soap in their bathroom, and the half-eaten dinner still on the kitchen table that the water hadn't reached yet, and was sitting there on the second floor like a timestamp, like evidence of the moment when ordinary became extraordinary, and a person stopped eating and left. There was no one in the house. The light had been reflection. She came back out through the second floor window she'd gone in through. The front door being 3 feet underwater and stuck, she'd long since stopped expecting doors to work. And she dropped back into the water and stood there for a moment with her hand on the brick of the house, looking at the street that wasn't a street, listening to the sound the flood made. She had been thinking in the back of her mind all day, the way you think when your foreground is occupied, that low-frequency processing that runs underneath action, about Eleanor Marsh. About the way Eleanor had gripped her arm hard enough to bruise. About the sound of Eleanor saying please and thank you as though they were the same prayer. She had pulled 14 people out of the water before Eleanor. She had done this for 8 years. She had never, not once, had someone hold her that way. That specific way. That I am transferring my will to survive into your body way. She had not cried during it. She would not cry now, but she was aware of something in her chest that didn't have a clinical name, something that wasn't on the assessment forms, something that the training manuals didn't have a protocol for. She let it sit there, filed it under later. She had a very large later file. She moved back toward the staging area. The debriefs at the end of long operations are strange events. You bring people together who have been running on adrenaline and thermal discipline and the focused tunnel of task completion, and you sit them down in a room or a parking lot, and you ask them to produce language about what happened. And the gap between the experience and the language available for the experience is so large that what comes out is often not the thing itself, but a kind of rough map of it. Here is where the current was. Here is where we found the vehicle. Here is where the woman was on the porch. Not, here's what it felt like when the surge came, and she said please, and I held her, and for a moment I didn't know if we would both go down or both stay up. Not that. Darren Walsh ran the debrief with the same flat efficiency he ran everything. Numbers, times, outcomes. 63 residents evacuated. For transported for medical treatment, none critical. 2 individuals hospitalized. Harold's bad knee had turned out to be worse than Harold had let on, and Patricia Okafor's ankle, which was fractured rather than sprained, had needed a real splint and imaging. Both stable. No fatalities in the evacuation zone. The property losses were substantial and would take months to fully assess. He said the last part, the part about property losses, The way you say something you know is catastrophic, but which is not the catastrophe you were most afraid of, and everyone in the room understood the register he was working in because they had all been most afraid of the same thing. They had dodged the worst of it. Not all of it, but the worst. After the debrief in the parking lot, people stood around in the particular looseness of people who have stopped running and are not yet sure what to do with stillness. Someone had brought pizza, 3 boxes pepperoni, from a place across town that had stayed dry and opened because it was on the high side of the ridge and had apparently decided that this was the day to be the best version of a pizza place. The pizza was very good in the way that food is very good when you have forgotten to eat for 9 hours and your body receives it like a missing dispatch. Maya ate 2 slices standing up and watched Daniel Park talk to Rico. Rico was laughing. Daniel was not laughing yet, but he was getting there. She could see it, the gradual thaw of the day leaving his face, the thing that happens when someone who has been holding tension all day is offered permission to put it down. Rico was good at that. He was, in his way, the best at that. She thought, Daniel is going to be fine. She thought, he already is, he just doesn't know it yet. She finished her second slice of pizza and got in her truck. She drove home in the dark. The roads on the high side of town were normal. Wet, but normal, the kind of wet that is just weather and not disaster. Her headlights hit puddles, and she went through them, and the sound was nothing special. She drove with the radio off. She was aware of a specific quality of quiet that she knew from the end of long operations, a kind of absolute ground-level silence in herself that wasn't peace exactly. Peace implies resolution, but with something like suspension. She had spent all day being a mechanism, and the mechanism was tired and quiet and processing. She got home at 8:32. She stood in the shower for a long time. The hot water hit her, and she felt her body remember that it had been cold. Remember the cold the way you remember a fight. The specific temperature of it, the way her feet had gone white and blank, the particular sensation of moving water against her legs for 9 hours. Her skin prickled. Her feet ached. She stood there and let the hot water do its work and did not think about anything specific and thought about everything in general. She dried off. She sat on the edge of her bed. The apartment was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. She sat there for a while. She was not going to call anyone. There was no one specifically to call, which was a fact she generally did not think about directly and was thinking about now only because the apartment was very quiet and she was very awake even though she was very tired, and sometimes those two things together make the walls of a space feel closer than they are. She thought about Eleanor Marsh in her yellow housecoat with the small white flowers, standing on her porch in the water, gripping the railing. She thought about the way Eleanor had looked at her and said you didn't let go, the specific way she'd said it, as if letting go was a thing that happened often, as if the default of the world was things and people releasing each other, and holding on was the anomaly, the thing worth noting. She thought that Eleanor was probably not wrong about that. She lay down on her bed without getting under the covers and looked at the ceiling, and the refrigerator hummed, and she fell asleep sometime before 10 o'clock without meaning to, which was fine, which was what her body knew she needed, which was the kindest thing it could do for her. She dreamed about the water. Not badly. Not the nightmare version. Just the water, moving that brown and patient flood, and she was in it, and it was cold but manageable, and she was holding something, and she didn't look down to see what it was. She just held it. In the morning, she drove to the community center. This was not protocol. There was no operational reason for it. The rescue phase was over. The recovery phase was beginning, and that was a different kind of work involving different organizations and different skill sets, and her role in it was minimal. She did not have to be there. She went anyway. The community center gymnasium in Harlow Creek had been converted overnight into a displacement shelter. Cots in rows, folding tables, a church group running a hot breakfast from a series of industrial warming trays, the smell of scrambled eggs and coffee, and the particular institutional blandness that emergency shelters have, the anti-smell of efficiency, the smell of we made room for you. She found Eleanor Marsh at a table near the east windows. Eleanor was sitting with 3 other women, all roughly her age, all holding coffee cups, and talking with the animated specificity of people who have something real and recent to talk about. Eleanor looked different without the fear in her, smaller, somehow, and also more. She was dressed in donated clothes that didn't quite fit, A sweatshirt from college her grandchildren might have attended, and elastic waist pants, and someone's spare sneakers. And she had her white hair neatly arranged, and she was talking. And when she looked up and saw Maya standing at the edge of the gym, her whole face changed. She stood up. She moved around the table faster than a 71-year-old woman who had spent the previous day waist deep in floodwater should have been able to move. And she crossed the gym, and she took Maya's hands in both of hers. And she said, "I hoped you'd come." Maya had not expected that. She didn't know what she'd expected. Maybe a polite recognition. The kind of thank you that is real, but contained, the kind between people who are grateful and done. Not this. Not this grip. Both hands, the warmth of it. "I wanted to check on you," Maya said. "You need to eat something," Eleanor said, which was not a response to what Maya had said, but was possibly the most accurate response she could have offered. She looked at Maya the way mothers look at people they have decided to feed. "Come sit with us." Maya sat. The three women at the table, Beverly, June, and a woman named Rosa, who had been Eleanor's neighbor for 15 years, and whose house was on slightly higher ground, and had come through largely intact, received Maya with the focused interest of women for whom other people are an ongoing research project. They asked her where she was from, and how long she'd been doing rescue work, and whether she had family in Harlow Creek, and what she thought the damage assessment would look like for the neighborhood. She answered all of it. Simply. Honestly. She ate scrambled eggs from a paper plate. Eleanor sat next to her and was mostly quiet, which was, Maya gathered, not Eleanor's usual register. She was watching Maya the way people watch something they've been thinking about and are now trying to fit the thought to the actual. "Can I ask you something?" Eleanor said. "Sure." When the water surged, she paused. "Did you think we were going to fall?" Maya looked at her, at the direct blue of her eyes, at the question in them, which was real, not catastrophizing, not reliving, just genuinely wanting to know. "For about 2 seconds," Maya said. "What happened in those 2 seconds?" "I planted my feet." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. She had both hands around her coffee cup. She was looking at something that wasn't in the room. "I've been living in that house for 41 years, she said. "My husband and I moved in when we were 30. He passed 7 years ago." She stopped, not because she was going to cry. There was no fragility in it, but because she was choosing words carefully with the respect of someone who has learned that words can carry more than you mean them to if you're not careful. "I have been in that house every single day for 41 years. Not all of it has been good. Some of it has been very hard." Her thumb moved around the rim of the coffee cup. "I did not want to leave. Not because I couldn't. Because I had decided that house was the center of everything, and I was not ready to have the center moved." She looked at Maya. "You didn't give me a choice about it. You needed to move," Maya said. "I know." A pause. "I'm glad you didn't ask." Maya held that. She understood what Eleanor was giving her. Not just thanks, but something more specific. The thing that happens when someone who has been autonomous and self-sufficient for a very long time is moved by force of circumstance and the force of another person and discovers that the moving was the right thing and is able to say so. That was not a small gift. That was a significant one. "Your house is probably okay," Maya said. It was not a certainty. She didn't have the damage reports yet, but the houses on Sycamore Court had been brick and the water levels had been bad, but not catastrophic, and she had reason for cautious optimism. "The water's receding. They'll do structural assessments today." Eleanor's face did the thing again. That complicated several things at once expression. "My tulip bulbs," she said. "I'm worried about the tulip bulbs." "They're probably fine," Maya said. "Tulips are," she paused. She actually didn't know a lot about tulips. "They're resilient." "They are." Eleanor nodded, with the certainty of someone who had been growing things for decades. "They've come through hard winters before." She set down her coffee cup and looked at Maya with the directness of someone who had spent 71 years deciding what was worth saying and what wasn't, and had mostly figured it out. "You do hard work," she said. "I don't think people thank you enough for it." Maya started. "It's important," Eleanor said. "Let me say it's important." She said it. Maya let her. Daniel Park was in the parking lot of the community center when Maya came out. He was sitting on the hood of a truck that was not his, apparently not caring about this, looking at his phone. He was wearing dry clothes, jeans, and a green fleece jacket and different socks, which she noted were still orange, apparently a commitment. And He looked younger than he had yesterday, which meant he had slept, which was good. He looked up when she came out. You came to check on them, he said. Not a question. Yeah, me too. He nodded at the community center door. Eleanor Marsh wanted to know if I liked peanut butter cookies. Maya looked at him. She's making them, he said, in a shelter kitchen. They said they had peanut butter, and she found a volunteer coordinator, and she's apparently making cookies right now. For the whole shelter. He paused. She asked if I had any allergies. Maya stood there for a moment with this information. Of course she is, she said. He got off the hood of the truck, stood next to her. They both looked at the community center door. I keep thinking about the surge, Daniel said. The flatway, he said it told her he'd been thinking about it since last night. That 2 or 3 seconds. Whether I did the right thing, I didn't wait for your signal. You read the situation and you moved, Maya said. That's the right thing. You had a protocol. Protocols are approximations. You had eyes. She looked at him. You were right. He absorbed this. Did not preen over it. Just absorbed it. I think I want to keep doing this, he said. The rescue work. I think he stopped. The thing he was trying to say was too big for the container he was finding for it. She recognized that. She remembered being 20 and trying to say things that didn't have words yet. You should, she said. You're good at it. He looked at her. Something in his face shifted. Not gratitude exactly, but something adjacent to it. Something more useful. Like a direction becoming clearer. You're going to go back, right? He said. After all this? After a day off, she said. Yes. How many times have you done this? A lot. And it's always, he stopped again. I don't know what I'm asking. Yes, she said. It's always something. He nodded. He went back into the community center to find out if Eleanor Marsh needed help with the cookies. Maya got in her truck. She sat there for a moment without starting it. The parking lot was ordinary. A sparrow landed on the curb and looked at something and flew away. The sky was clearing. Really clearing now, the brutal gray of the storm weather giving way to the thin, pale, washed-out blue that follows heavy rain, the sky that looks like it's been scrubbed clean and is still deciding what color to be. She started the truck. She drove away from the community center and through the wet streets of Harlow Creek and past the edge of River Road where the water was still visible, but lower, visibly lower, pulled back from the yards and porches by the patient physics of drainage, revealing the mud and the debris and the long work of assessment and repair that was just beginning. She drove past the street that led to Sycamore Court. She thought about the tulip bulbs. She thought about planting your feet. She drove home through a town that was damaged and would be repaired and was still, and probably stubbornly in the way of places that have seen floods before and will see them again, still standing. She drove home. She had a day off. She was going to eat real food and sleep more than 4 hours and call her mother, which was a thing she kept meaning to do and kept filing under later, and which today she was going to take out of that file. She was going to sit down at the table, not stand at the counter. Sit down. The apartment would be quiet. The refrigerator would hum. She would be there inside all of it, not rushing toward anything, for one day. And then she would go back to the water. She always went back to the water, not because it was easy, not because it didn't cost her something she couldn't fully name, but because she was good at it, and because there were people who needed someone who would plant their feet in the current and hold on, and she was, for reasons she had stopped trying to fully understand, the person who did that. The scout had asked her, "How many times have you done this?" "A lot," she'd said. What she hadn't said, what she didn't know how to say without it sounding like something it wasn't, was that every time was different. Every time was Eleanor's grip on her arm. Every time was Harold watching his daddy's truck go sideways into the current with a face that held 30 years in it. Every time was something that would settle differently in her at 3 in the morning, something that would add itself to the long accumulation of what she'd carried. She was not afraid of the accumulation. She had met people who did this work and burned out from it, and she understood how that happened, and she was careful about it in herself the way you're careful about anything you need to keep. But she had never, not once, gotten out of the water at the end of the day and thought, "I should not have done that. I should have let someone else." She had always thought, "Yes, this is the thing to do." She thought it now. The sky above Harlow Creek was becoming blue. The water was pulling back. Somewhere in a community center gymnasium, an old woman with white hair was making peanut butter cookies for 63 people she had mostly never met, in a kitchen that wasn't hers and clothes that weren't hers, in a situation she had not asked for and could not have predicted, and was navigating with the particular resilience of someone who has been growing things in hard ground long enough to know that the coming back is always possible. Somewhere on the wet streets of River Road, the water was showing what it had taken. The mud, the debris, the ordinary objects of 71 years of living, rearranged by current into something that didn't look like anyone's life anymore, and would have to be sorted through and kept and mourned and cleaned and rebuilt. That was the work that came next. Maya Chan drove home through the clearing sky and the wet streets, and she was tired in a way that went all the way to the bone, and she had a very large file labeled later that had gotten significantly larger today, and she was going to sit down at her table and eat real food and call her mother. And then she would go back. She always went back. That was the thing about flood rescue, about service, about the particular calling of standing in moving water and holding on. It was not a thing you did once and were done with. It was not a thing you finished. It was a practice. You planted your feet. You held on. You went back. And the water, patient, enormous, older than any of them, kept doing what water does. It moved. It surged. It receded. It would come again. And when it did, she would be there. She always was.